So Panasonic have finally done it and beaten Red in Japanese court over the Red RAW patent. And this matters because Red RAW is the technology that gives Red a significant competitive advantage over other camera manufacturers. It means that Red cameras can shoot RAW, which is brilliant for high quality color correction, that's compressed, which means the file sizes are manageable, internally, which means you don't have to have bolt-on widgets to the camera. It's convenient, all in one box. And having a patent that protects that and means other camera manufacturers cannot do the same has meant that Red has stayed at the forefront of digital cinema. And other camera manufacturers have wanted to do a similar RAW offer to Red, to be able to have compressed RAW in camera. And mainly they've been blocked. There have been multiple court cases over the years where other manufacturers have taken on Red, and these are big manufacturers, people like Apple and Sony, people with power, and they've lost to Red. Red have successfully defended their patent, and it's one of the reasons why they've still been such a successful camera manufacturer, because, there's a lot of similarities between digital cameras, and Red RAW is one of their unique selling points. My thought is it's actually a surprise that it's taken this long for a company like Panasonic to actually have some success in court. I think the Red RAW patent is slightly on dodgy ground, and that's just been proved, because a patent needs to be innovative. It needs to talk about a technology that is groundbreaking and is a new and unique way of doing things. And I'm not sure Red meets that test. So my thought is actually, I'm not surprised that Panasonic have won. I'm surprised that it's taken nearly 20 years for someone to win. So Red are interesting. They made a really innovative camera in 2007, the Red one. Now, this camera was groundbreaking in many ways, partially because it offered compressed RAW recording at the time at 4K in camera at a crazy price point at $17,000, which was very, very cheap for a camera doing all of those things. And Red was granted a patent at the time for this Red RAW internal RAW recording. But they didn't invent all those technologies. Red was not the first 4K camera. That was the Dolce Origin, which came out in 2004. And it was not the first camera to record RAW in any format. Both the Arri D20 in 2005 and the Dolce Origin in 2004 recorded RAW data. Red were not the first camera format to offer compressed RAW, because compressed RAW is much more flexible in terms of file sizes than uncompressed RAW, which has massive file sizes. That was Silicon Imaging. So Silicon Imaging released a 2K camera in 2006, I believe, that offered compressed RAW. And all of the cameras like the Dolce, the Arri D20 and the Silicon Imaging had external recorders. And the reason they did was, at the time, computing power was slower, equipment was bigger and heavier, and it was more practical to have a small camera unit and a tethered recorder. Red was innovative in putting the recorder in the camera. They used improvements in computer tech to miniaturize it and put it in camera, but you couldn't argue that other camera manufacturers wouldn't have done the same thing. I mean, stills cameras were recording RAW internally since about 2000. Canon made their first RAW recording camera in 2000, which did RAW in camera in the year 2000. The only difference between a stills camera and a video camera is a frame rate. Like, the video camera is a stills camera that runs at 24 frames per second. So what Red did is took all these technologies that existed, put them in a box, and made a great combination at a great price point, and then were able to protect that with a patent. But had Red not come along and done this, I don't think you could argue that other camera manufacturers wouldn't have had the same ideas. Computer tech got better. It might have been Arri or Dolce that miniaturized the RAW recorder and put it in the camera. Red got there first, but does that mean they could then block all the camera manufacturers from doing the same? I mean, they were able to do that, but I don't think that was really fair, because you could apply that same argument to, say, video games. So Atari was the first manufacturer to produce a full-color handheld games console, and if they'd been granted a patent on first full-color handheld game console, the Atari Lynx, no one else can do that, then things like the Sega Game Gear couldn't happen. Things like the Nintendo Switch couldn't happen because Atari owns the patent. Like, it would be crazy if, just because they got there first and did the first full color handheld console, that no one else can do it. But the mad thing is, Red successfully defended this patent, and for years and years, other camera manufacturers had to use workarounds. So a lot of camera manufacturers would have to use like an external RAW recorder, like Sony did, or not do compressed RAW, do uncompressed RAW, which Arri did that, but means you have huge file sizes, or use slightly different flavors of RAW rather than using a straight raw Bayer readout of the camera, compress it, store it. Blackmagic did a workaround where they sort of did a semi-hybrid RAW, which solves some of the problems, isn't as efficient or as good as Red RAW. So Red successfully defended its patent for many years until 2023. So Nikon was sued by Red for launching their own version of RAW in camera. And Red were like, no, this is too similar to Red RAW, you can't do it. And Nikon's defense was basically the point I just made, that, we don't think your patent has merit. Not that you don't have a patent, but it's actually not that innovative. Just taking other technologies and combining them and putting them in one box is that grounds for a patent. Like, the difference between having an external recorder and an internal recorder, does it really matter that much? And so the world was really interested about this 2023 lawsuit, because it was going to finally answer the question, except that it didn't. Both parties walked away, which is crazy, because you think like, well, Red needs to defend its patent, and Nikon, they've got everything to win. If they could beat Red in court, then that busts open the patent, and they can then have the advantage of having RAW on their cameras. But they both sides stood down. Very confusing. Then a few months later, it turned out that Nikon had acquired Red. They bought them out. Now, this can only be for Nikon to acquire the Red RAW patent. Like, Nikon didn't really need Red's technology. It already was a brilliant camera manufacturer. I don't think there's anything Red could really have taught Nikon about making and designing cameras and camera tech. So this is purely a case that Nikon must have decided that either they couldn't beat Red in court, or it was easier just to buy it and own the technology and start sticking Red RAW and Red RAW adjacent technologies in their cameras. And that's what they did until this year, when Panasonic came up against Red/Nikon, arguing the same thing. And the fun thing is Nikon now have to defend the patent that they were attacking 3 years ago. So 3 years ago, they were saying, oh, no, this patent's rubbish, it's not innovative, it's not valid. And now that, no, now that we own it, we spent all this money to acquire it, this patent is highly valuable and should be defended to the hilt. So Nikon go against Panasonic defending the patent, and what happens? They only go and lose, and they lose on appeal. And it was conclusive enough that the Japanese court said, well, actually, Panasonic are right. This patent isn't innovative enough. It doesn't demonstrate enough innovation to be granted. So it's as if the patent never existed. So at least in the Japanese market, there's no barrier to other camera manufacturers putting RAW in their cameras. So what does that mean for the rest of the world? Well, we're still under Red's patent, so it may mean nothing. Nothing may change. The Japanese market may have access to RAW, but the rest of us still have to go with the kludges or the halfway houses. But my hope is that perhaps this is the start of the avalanche. The other camera manufacturers, including Panasonic, are like, well, we had success in Japan, we beat Red there. If we apply the same argument in other territories, maybe we can start winning. And maybe it can erode Red's stranglehold on the technology, and that will open up innovation, and more camera manufacturers will be able to offer RAW technology, which I hope. Anyway, I'd love to know what your thoughts are. Do you think it's about time the Red RAW patent was taken apart and other camera manufacturers are able to offer the technology? Or do you think Red have every right to defend their patent and it should have been granted, and, people should have access to defending their technology, and those other camera manufacturers don't have a leg to stand on? Anyway, I'd love to know your thoughts. I'd love to know your thoughts. Please let me know what you think in the comments.